take the cash and walk away," the CEO said, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Single dads don't get to play hero in my building. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below." The envelope hovered between them, crisp and thick, absurdly clean against oil-stained floors and rusted pipes. She stood beside a black executive sedan, heels sharp, posture sharper, confidence draped over her like the tailored coat on her shoulders. The mechanic in front of her wore steel-toed boots and a faded uniform with his name stitched above the pocket. To her, he was a minor inconvenience with grease under his nails. She expected him to hesitate, maybe glance at the money twice, maybe swallow. He didn't. Instead, the single father looked past the envelope toward the service elevators that climbed to the glittering ballroom above. His expression didn't change. His breathing didn't shift. And that stillness unsettled her more than outrage ever could. That was the moment she misunderstood him. Seconds before the upper floors would tremble. Seconds before her investors would look for the very man she was trying to silence. This wasn't about a bribe. It was about what a father refuses to abandon. Marcus Hale didn't raise his voice. The garage smelled of gasoline and damp cement, and somewhere overhead a ventilation fan hummed unevenly. He noticed things like that. Small vibrations, subtle irregularities. They rarely lied. Victoria Langford watched him with open impatience. "You filed a report," she said. "You made your point. Now withdraw it. Tonight's launch can't be delayed because a maintenance worker thinks he hears ghosts in the walls." He finally met her eyes. Calm, unblinking. They're not ghosts. 3 levels above them, crews were testing sound equipment for the biotech gala. The bass thumped faintly through the beams. A low pulse underfoot. Marcus felt it the way other men felt weather changes in their knees. The envelope shifted slightly as the assistant holding it adjusted his grip. "Mr. Hale," he murmured, "this is generous. Sign the retraction. Go home. Go home." Home meant Lila curled beneath a blanket printed with constellations. It meant unfinished math homework on the kitchen table and a promise that maybe, just maybe, she could visit the tower tonight to see where her dad worked. She'd been proud when he'd pointed at the skyline and said, "That one." Pride was fragile when built on a lie. Victoria stepped closer. "You change filters. You mop floors. You don't dictate structural timelines." The words were meant to shrink him. They didn't. Marcus glanced toward the concrete ramp leading upward. He'd already checked the ballroom support columns twice that week. Hairline fractures had spidered along a load-bearing joint. His handheld reader had confirmed stress displacement beyond tolerance. He'd documented everything. Dates. Measurements. Risk projections. Years ago, he'd been trained to calculate failure points under pressure, bridges in hostile zones, temporary bases erected in unstable terrain. He'd worn a different uniform then. Different stakes. Same physics. He looked back at her. "You're pushing too much weight onto a compromised joint." Victoria let out a sharp breath that almost passed for a laugh. "Are you threatening me with engineering jargon? I'm warning you." Silence stretched between them. A security camera blinked red from the corner of the ceiling. Indifferent witness. "You want more money?" She pressed. "Say it." He shook his head slowly. "I don't walk away from things that can crush children." The sentence landed harder than she expected. Her jaw tightened. "Don't weaponize parenthood." "I'm not," he replied evenly. "I'm stating the risk." Footsteps echoed from the ramp. Elliot Crane hurried down. Tablet clutched to his chest, tie loosened. Anxiety written plainly across his face. He slowed when he saw the envelope. "Miss Langford," Elliot said carefully, "the vibration sensors in the ballroom are spiking again." Victoria didn't look at him. "Reset them. We already did. Twice." The bass test upstairs deepened, vibrating through steel and stone. Marcus felt the shift more clearly now, a subtle shudder beneath the surface, like a breath pulled too tight. Elliot swallowed. It matches his report. Victoria finally turned, irritation flashing. It's a calibration error. Marcus listened again, counted seconds between pulses, measured rhythm in his head. The tremor wasn't random. It was escalating. He stepped toward the service elevators. "Where do you think you're going?" she demanded. "Up," he said. "You're not authorized." Another tremor rippled through the floor, slightly stronger. Even Victoria felt that one. Her heel shifted. Marcus pressed the elevator call button. "Open it. You don't give orders here." He didn't look back at her, then consider it a suggestion. The assistant hesitated, glancing between them. Elliot's voice dropped. "If he's right and the joint fails during peak occupancy, it won't," Victoria snapped, but the certainty in her tone had thinned. Above them, a metallic groan carried faintly down the shaft. Not loud, not dramatic, just wrong. Marcus's jaw tightened. He'd heard that sound before, years ago, seconds before a temporary bridge folded under armored weight. He met Victoria's gaze one last time. "You can protect your launch," he said quietly, "or you can protect the people standing on it." The elevator doors slid open with a hollow chime. He stepped inside. The bass upstairs thudded again, heavier now. And this time, even Victoria Langford felt the floor answer. The elevator doors sealed with a metallic clap, and the vibration followed him upward like a warning heartbeat. Marcus felt each pulse through the soles of his boots, measuring the intervals the way he once measured artillery echoes. Count, assess, predict. The lift lights flickered faintly as it climbed. Elliot slipped inside just before the doors closed, breath uneven. "She's going to fire you," he muttered, eyes fixed on the glowing floor numbers. "Maybe," Marcus replied, "but that joint won't care about my employment status." Another tremor passed through the shaft, subtle but sharper than before. Above them, the ballroom doors were already open. Crystal chandeliers scattered white light across polished marble. Investors in tailored suits and silk dresses clustered beneath banners announcing Langford Biotech's breakthrough launch. Laughter rose in controlled waves. Champagne glasses clinked. No one noticed the faint tremble beneath their feet. Marcus stepped out first. The bass test from the sound system rolled across the floor in heavy pulses. He tilted his head slightly, listening beyond the music, to the steel beneath it. Elliot followed, voice tight. "Security's going to block you from the stage." "They won't if you walk with me," Marcus answered. He crossed the edge of the ballroom, moving along the perimeter wall toward a discreet access panel hidden behind decorative drapery. His fingers traced the seam, feeling heat where friction shouldn't exist. The floor shivered again. Near the center of the room, Victoria stood at a raised platform greeting board members, her expression composed for cameras. When she spotted him near the wall, her posture stiffened. She moved quickly, heels striking marble. "What are you doing up here?" "Checking what you ignored." "You don't have clearance." A sharper metallic creak interrupted her. It wasn't loud enough to silence the crowd, but close enough that a few guests turned their heads. Marcus pressed his palm flat against the column casing. The vibration pattern had changed, less rhythmic now, more chaotic. "It's escalating," he said quietly. Victoria folded her arms. "You're causing a scene. I'm preventing one." She leaned closer, voice low and edged. "I offered you a way out, generous compensation. You chose drama." He held her gaze evenly. "I chose responsibility." The sound system boomed as technicians raised volume for a lighting cue. The bass thudded harder, reverberating through the structural beams above the ballroom ceiling. Marcus felt a spike beneath his hand. Elliot swallowed. The sensors just pinged again. Victoria's jaw tightened. They're miscalibrated. Marcus crouched and removed the decorative panel with a swift twist of his screwdriver. The exposed steel joint behind it showed faint stress lines, almost invisible under polished casing, but real. "You're not touching that," she snapped. "It's already moving." Another tremor rolled outward, stronger this time. A ripple of confusion passed through nearby guests as champagne in their glasses quivered. Marcus stood. "You need to pause the program." Victoria shook her head immediately. "Absolutely not. Investors flew in from 3 countries, and they'll sue from hospital beds if this drops." Her eyes flashed. "Don't exaggerate." He took a slow breath. "I don't." Across the ballroom, the host tapped the microphone. Feedback squealed briefly. "Ladies and gentlemen, if we could direct your attention to the stage." Victoria stepped backward toward the platform, voice tight. "This conversation is over." Marcus watched as she ascended the steps, smoothing her coat, transforming irritation into executive poise. Cameras angled toward her. Applause rose. The floor trembled again. Elliot's tablet vibrated in his hand. He stared at the screen. Load distribution just exceeded safe variance. Marcus moved toward the service corridor that led behind the stage. "Then we stabilize before variance becomes failure." Security guard stepped in front of him. "Sir, this area is restricted." He didn't raise his voice. "If I don't access that junction in the next 2 minutes, you're going to need more than security." One guard hesitated, glancing at the subtle tremor underfoot. From the stage, Victoria began her keynote, voice amplified and confident. "Tonight marks a new era of innovation." The words were steady. The building wasn't. Marcus turned slightly toward the nearest camera mounted along the wall. "You're recording this," he said calmly to no one in particular. "Good," Elliot exhaled. "If you're right, I am." Another vibration surged upward, stronger, enough to draw murmurs from the crowd. A few guests shifted uneasily. Marcus met Elliot's eyes. "Open the access hatch behind stage left. That requires executive code." "Then override it." Elliot hesitated only a second before moving. For a moment, the music cut out unexpectedly. The silence felt heavier than the bass. In that brief quiet, the building released a low metallic groan. Longer now, unmistakable. Heads turned. Victoria faltered mid-sentence. Marcus stepped toward the corridor entrance as confusion began to ripple through the ballroom like spreading cracks in ice. Before this gets worse, subscribe with the bell on because what happens next proves quiet men aren't weak. They're prepared. The chandeliers trembled, light scattering across faces that had come for celebration, not warning. And the floor answered again, harder. The tremor rolled through the ballroom harder this time, rattling glassware and drawing a sharp gasp from the nearest tables. The chandeliers swayed, just slightly, but enough to turn murmurs into uneasy whispers. Victoria froze mid-sentence on the stage, her smile tightening under the lights. Marcus didn't wait. He moved past the security guard whose authority had just been replaced by instinct. "Clear the center," he said firmly. "Shift weight toward the perimeter walls." Guests blinked at him, confused. A few laughed nervously, assuming it was part of the program. Another metallic groan dragged through the ceiling. Elliot reappeared from behind the stage, breathless. "The access hatch is open." "Good." Victoria descended from the platform, heels striking sharply against the floor. "This is unacceptable," she hissed. "You're frightening my investors." "They should be frightened," Marcus replied evenly. A deeper shudder answered him, stronger than before. Several glasses toppled from a tray. One shattered, the sound cracking through the room like a warning shot. Now people were listening. "What's happening?" Someone shouted. Victoria's composure flickered. "Remain calm," she called out, voice amplified through the microphone still clipped to her lapel. "It's a minor technical issue." Marcus shook his head once. "It's not minor." He stepped onto the edge of the stage without asking permission. A ripple of surprise moved through the audience at the sight of a maintenance worker standing beside the CEO. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice steady but firm, "I need you to move toward the outer corridors. Walk. Don't run." Victoria grabbed his arm. "You don't control this room. I control whether this joint holds another 5 minutes." The words cut through the rising noise. Elliot climbed onto the stage, tablet shaking in his hand. Load variance just spiked again. The south support is shifting 3 millimeters every 30 seconds. Victoria stared at the numbers on the screen. For the first time, doubt cracked through her certainty. The floor lurched, not violently, but enough to tilt the illusion of safety. A chandelier chain creaked loudly overhead. A woman near the center stumbled, clutching the table for balance. Marcus leaned toward Victoria, voice low and controlled. "You can keep your reputation intact, or you can keep them intact. Choose." Her jaw tightened. Cameras were still rolling. Board members were watching. So were hundreds of guests. Another groan ripped through the ceiling, longer now, deeper. "Evacuate the room," she said finally, the words forced but clear. Relief didn't show on Marcus's face. He was already moving. "Elliot, trigger fire alarm override. It'll move them faster without panic." Within seconds, the sharp wail of the alarm pierced the ballroom. Red strobes flashed against marble and silk. Controlled chaos erupted. "Follow the exit signs." Marcus called out, guiding clusters toward the stairwells. "Stay to the walls." The base equipment powered down abruptly, but the absence of sound made the building's distress more audible, steel grinding faintly above plaster. Victoria stood near the stage, watching her meticulously planned launch dissolve into evacuation lines. Her hands trembled, though she hid them behind crossed arms. Elliot's voice cracked. "The south beam's torque is accelerating." Marcus glanced toward the ceiling. "We stabilize it from below." "That area's sealed," Elliot said. "Not to me." He moved toward the backstage corridor. Security followed without argument now. Behind the curtain, the air felt warmer. The access hatch yawned open above a service ladder. A low vibration hummed through the metal rungs. Marcus grabbed a toolkit from the wall cabinet. "Cut the decorative weight panels," he instructed. "They're adding unnecessary load." Elliot hesitated. "With what?" Marcus tossed him a wrench. With urgency, another tremor pulsed through the structure. Dust sifted faintly from a seam overhead. From the ballroom beyond the curtains came the thundering shuffle of hundreds of feet moving toward exits. The evacuation was working, but time was thinning. Victoria appeared at the corridor entrance, breathing harder than she wanted anyone to notice. "Tell me what you need." He didn't look down at her. "Clear the entire south quadrant. No one under this beam. It's already in motion. Then move faster." For a heartbeat, she simply stared at him, at the steadiness in his posture, the precision in his commands. This wasn't guesswork. It was control under pressure. She turned sharply and began issuing orders to security, her voice carrying sharper authority than before, but now it followed his. Marcus climbed the ladder toward the exposed joint. The metal groaned again, closer this time, and as his hand reached the compromised beam, he felt the exact moment the stress line deepened beneath his palm. The stress line deepened beneath his palm, a faint shift in the steel that most men would have missed, but not him. It felt like a pulse trying to break through bone. Marcus braced one boot against the ladder rung and leaned closer to the exposed joint, a thin fracture traced along the weld seam, barely visible under the emergency lights flashing red below. The beam wasn't failing all at once. It was unraveling, incrementally, predictably. Torques increasing, Elliot called from below, voice echoing up the service shaft. "I know," Marcus replied calmly. "Kill power to the decorative rigging on this side. Every pound matters." Another tremor rippled through the frame. Dust sifted into his hair. Somewhere beneath the curtains, the evacuation alarm wailed without mercy. Victoria's voice cut through the chaos from the corridor. "South quadrant is nearly clear." "Nearly isn't clear," Marcus shot back. He adjusted his stance and pulled a compact brace from his toolkit, a reinforced steel clamp normally used for maintenance stabilization during inspections. It wasn't designed for emergency structural support, but physics didn't care about design labels. He secured the clamp along the weakest portion of the seam and tightened it slowly. Each turn of the wrench resisted him harder than the last. The beam groaned in protest. Below, Elliot stared at his tablet. Displacement just slowed. Barely. But it slowed. Marcus exhaled through his teeth. Good. That buys us seconds. Another violent tremor shook the shaft, stronger than the others. The ladder rattled beneath him. Victoria stepped closer, her earlier composure gone. "How long will it hold? Depends how fast you empty the room." The metallic grinding sound intensified, longer, heavier. It wasn't just one joint anymore. Load redistribution was beginning. If one point failed, the stress would cascade. Marcus tightened the clamp again until his forearm burned. Sweat slid down his temple despite the cool air. "Elliot," he called. "Pull up the original load specs." "I have them." "What's the safe maximum occupancy for this configuration?" 350. How many were inside?" A pause. "Over 600. Victoria closed her eyes for half a second. Marcus didn't. "Cut the live stream feed," he ordered. "Power systems are adding vibration." Elliot moved quickly toward the breaker panel. The alarm shifted tone as emergency lighting kicked fully into place. Outside the corridor, footsteps thundered down stairwells. A sudden crack echoed above him. Not loud, but wrong. Marcus froze for one precise second, listening. The sound came from the upper weld, secondary stress fracture forming. "Elliot," he said evenly, "I need 2 more clamps from storage. We only have 1. "Then bring it." Victoria stepped forward. "Tell me what I can do." He looked down at her briefly, not with anger, not with accusation, just clarity. "Authorize whatever I need without debate." Her chin lifted slightly. "You have it." It was the first time she'd said those words to him. Elliot scrambled back with the second clamp, hands shaking. Marcus secured it beside the first, adjusting tension to redistribute weight across a wider surface. The beam responded with a low groan but no sharp crack. "Displacement is stabilizing," Elliot whispered, disbelief edging his voice. Marcus didn't allow himself relief. "Temporary. This isn't a fix, it's a pause." Below them, the ballroom doors slammed shut as the last wave of guests exited. The echo carried like a signal. Victoria's phone vibrated non-stop. Board members, investors, media. She ignored it. Another minute passed. The tremors softened, not gone, but contained. Marcus descended the ladder slowly, muscles tight from controlled strain. His boots hit the concrete floor with a dull thud. "Room's clear," Elliot said. Marcus nodded once and stepped back to examine the exposed structure from below. The clamps held, biting into steel with stubborn force. Victoria stared up at the compromised joint, then at him. "You predicted this. Yes. You filed documentation. Yes." "And she stopped. He finished the sentence without bitterness. "You offered me money." Silence pressed into the narrow corridor. From beyond the curtains came distant sirens, emergency responders arriving. Elliot glanced between them. Structural engineers are on their way. They'll confirm, Marcus said quietly. Victoria studied him as if seeing him clearly for the first time, not as maintenance staff, not as inconvenience, but as something else entirely. Who are you? She asked, the edge gone from her voice. He wiped dust from his hands with a rag. I maintain what's put in front of me. That's not what this was. He met her gaze. No, it wasn't. Above them, the beam held steady under the clamps. Fragile, temporary, saved by inches and timing. Victoria drew a slow breath. If that joint had failed during my speech, it would have failed under your audience, he corrected gently. The sirens grew louder. Outside, flashing lights painted red and blue against the marble lobby walls. Marcus stepped past her toward the corridor exit. This isn't over. She followed without argument. Because for the first time that night, Victoria Langford understood something she hadn't in the garage. The building had listened to him. And so would everyone else. The sirens bled into the corridor as emergency crews flooded the lobby below, boots striking marble in urgent rhythm. Marcus stepped out from behind the stage curtains into a ballroom now emptied of investors and applause. The chandeliers still trembled faintly, as if remembering the weight they'd almost carried too long. Victoria stood beside him, staring at the exposed access panel like it had personally betrayed her. Fire officials moved in quickly, scanning the ceiling with thermal sensors. One of them, a senior structural engineer, looked up toward the clamped joint and frowned. Who stabilized this? Marcus didn't answer immediately. Elliot did. He did. The engineer glanced at the oil-stained uniform, then back at the clamps biting into the weld seam. That wasn't guesswork. No, Marcus said calmly. It wasn't. Another responder approached with a tablet displaying structural scans. We're detecting load fatigue across the south support. If occupancy had remained at peak density. He didn't finish the sentence. Victoria swallowed. How long would it have held? The engineer met her eyes. Minutes, maybe less. Silence pressed down heavier than the failed beam. Marcus walked toward the edge of the ballroom floor and crouched, pressing his palm lightly against the surface. The tremors had eased, but residual stress vibrated faintly beneath his touch. It's redistributing, he murmured. The engineer studied him more closely. What's your background? Maintenance. That's not what I asked. Marcus stood slowly. Former Army Corps structural engineer. The words landed with quiet weight. Victoria blinked. You never disclosed that. You never asked. The fire official's posture shifted subtly, from authority to professional respect. Combat infrastructure? Yes, the engineer nodded once. Explains the clamps. Elliot exhaled shakily, relief mixing with awe. He filed a full risk assessment earlier this week. All eyes moved to Victoria. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't look away this time. I reviewed it, she admitted quietly. I chose to proceed. Outside the ballroom, flashing lights reflected off polished glass walls. Media vans were already lining the street below. The evacuation hadn't gone unnoticed. Marcus turned toward the corridor. You'll need to close this floor until permanent reinforcements are installed. We will, Victoria said quickly, almost reflexively. Not tomorrow, he added. Tonight. The engineer nodded. He's right. A sudden crack echoed again, small, but sharp enough to snap every head upward. One of the temporary clamps shifted half a centimeter. Marcus reacted instantly, moving back toward the ladder, everyone out of this quadrant. We just cleared it, Elliot said, panic creeping back. Then, clear it again. Victoria hesitated only a second before turning toward security. Move, now. Boots pounded as responders repositioned. The building groaned in low protest. Marcus climbed halfway up the ladder, assessing the clamp tension. The steel was adjusting to the reduced load, but unevenly. He tightened the secondary brace with slow precision. The groaning softened. Below, Victoria watched his every movement, not with skepticism now, with realization. "This isn't over," he said quietly without looking down. "No," she answered. "It isn't." He descended carefully. Outside the corridor entrance, a cluster of reporters had already breached the lobby perimeter. Camera lights flickered through glass panels like distant lightning. Elliot's tablet buzzed non-stop. Board members are demanding statements. Victoria straightened her shoulders, instinctively slipping back into executive posture. But something in her expression had shifted. She looked at Marcus. "They're going to ask how this happened." "Tell them," he said evenly. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Tell them what? That you were warned." The words weren't sharp. They were factual. A paramedic passed through the hallway, confirming no injuries. The miracle of it hung unspoken. Victoria's phone vibrated again. This time she answered. "Yes," she said into the receiver, voice measured but thinner than usual. "The event is suspended. Structural concerns, yes, no casualties." Her gaze drifted toward the ballroom ceiling where the clamps gleamed under emergency lights. Marcus stepped toward the exit. "Engineers will need full access to maintenance records." "You'll provide them," she replied automatically. "I already have." The engineer approached again. "Sir, if you hadn't stabilized that joint when you did." Marcus shook his head slightly. It held because people moved quickly. Victoria lowered the phone slowly. "Because you moved quickly." He didn't respond. Outside, the first live news broadcast began streaming across social media. Headlines scrolled in real time. Biotech Gala evacuated after structural failure. Marcus paused near the service elevator. Before the board rewrites the story, subscribe with the bell on, because what comes next isn't about damage control. It's about truth, under pressure. Victoria stepped closer to him, no longer towering, no longer dismissive. "You saved my company tonight," she said quietly. He met her gaze. "I saved the people inside it," and beyond the glass walls, cameras kept rolling as the narrative began to shift. Reporters clustered near the barricades outside Langford Tower, microphones raised, voices urgent. Red and blue lights pulsed across the marble lobby as first responders moved with practiced efficiency. Inside the ballroom, engineers set up laser levels and portable scanners, mapping stress fractures that had nearly rewritten the night. Marcus stood near the service elevator, hands resting loosely at his sides, watching professionals confirm what he already knew. One of the structural engineers crouched beneath the exposed beam and let out a slow whistle. "These fractures didn't form tonight," he said. "This is cumulative fatigue. Weeks, maybe months." Victoria heard it. Her shoulders stiffened. Elliot stepped forward with his tablet. Maintenance logs show repeated microvibration warnings starting 3 months ago. The engineer looked up. Were they addressed? Silence settled like dust. Marcus didn't speak. He didn't need to. Victoria finally answered. They were deferred. "For budget?" The engineer asked flatly. "For scheduling," she replied. But even she heard the weakness in it. Another scan lit up the engineer's screen. "The south support weld should have been reinforced when you upgraded the sound rigging last quarter." Elliot's eyes widened. That was part of the expansion plan. Marcus nodded once. More weight. Same structure. Victoria turned toward him slowly. "Why didn't you push harder?" He met her gaze without hostility. "I filed escalation twice." "You could have." "What?" he interrupted gently. "Gone over your head?" She didn't answer. Across the ballroom, a news crew managed to angle a camera through the open lobby doors, capturing glimpses of the exposed joint and flashing emergency lights. The story was spreading faster than she could control. A board member burst through the elevator doors, breathless and furious. "Victoria, what happened? Investors are already calling legal." She composed herself automatically. There was a structural irregularity. "It's contained." The engineer straightened. "Contained because he stabilized it." The board member followed the gesture toward Marcus, taking in the grease-stained uniform and calm posture. "He?" Former Army Corps structural engineer, Elliot added quickly. Recognition flickered faintly in the man's eyes. Respect followed. Marcus shifted slightly, uncomfortable under attention. It was physics, not heroics. The board member turned back to Victoria. "You were warned?" She hesitated. Cameras outside zoomed closer. "Yes," she admitted. The word felt heavier than the beam above them. Another engineer approached with a printout. "We'll need full closure of this floor." Immediate reinforcement. Media's already reporting potential negligence. Victoria inhaled slowly. "Draft a statement." The board member leaned closer, voice low. "If documentation shows ignored safety warnings, we're exposed." Marcus watched the exchange with steady eyes. This wasn't personal revenge. It was consequence. Elliot stepped beside him quietly. "They're pulling your report from archives. It's time-stamped before the event." "Good," Marcus replied. "You knew this would happen," Elliot said softly. "I knew the structure would fail under strain," he corrected. "Everything else is human." A reporter's voice echoed faintly from outside. "Sources confirm a maintenance worker raised early concerns." Victoria heard it too. She looked at Marcus again, this time without defensiveness. "You could have taken the money," she said under her breath. He didn't look away. "And watched it collapse?" A long pause stretched between them. "No," she said quietly. Another board member arrived, face pale. "Legal wants clarity. Did you attempt to silence him?" Victoria's spine straightened reflexively. The old instinct to protect image at any cost rose fast. But the exposed beam above them gleamed under emergency lights, clamps biting into steel like visible truth. "Yes," she said finally. "I did." The admission stunned even Elliot. Marcus didn't react outwardly. Inside, something settled, not triumph, not anger, just confirmation. Outside, camera flashes intensified. Social feeds were already dissecting the unfolding narrative. The mechanic who warned. The CEO who dismissed. The engineer approached Marcus once more. "We'd like you present during full structural reassessment. Your calculations were precise." Victoria glanced at him. "You'll be compensated." He shook his head slightly. "I'll be present." "For the company?" she asked. "For the building," he replied. Silence followed that, cleaner than before. In the lobby, evacuated guests clustered in anxious conversation. Some recognized him now, pointing quietly. A few nodded in gratitude as he passed. The tremors had ceased entirely, replaced by the distant hum of generators and low murmur of media speculation. Victoria stepped closer to him near the service corridor. Her voice was steady now, stripped of arrogance. "You saved hundreds of lives." He considered that. They saved themselves. They moved. Because you told them to. He met her eyes one last time in the flickering emergency light. You told them to. The difference between them wasn't competence. It was timing, and outside the glass walls, the world was deciding which part of that timing mattered most. Inside the ballroom, the emergency lights cast long shadows across exposed steel and overturned chairs. The noise had shifted from panic to procedure, measured voices, scanning devices, radios crackling with updates. The crisis had passed its breaking point. Now came the reckoning. Marcus stood beneath the compromised beam while engineers installed temporary supports beside his clamps. The metallic clicks of reinforced braces locking into place echoed through the hollowed room. Load is fully redistributed, one engineer confirmed. Structure stable for now. For now, Marcus repeated quietly. Victoria moved through the ballroom with board members flanking her. Her posture firm, but no longer untouchable. Whispers followed her steps. Investors who had once leaned in close now kept a cautious distance. A senior board member turned toward her. "We need to address the media immediately." "We will," she replied. "And him?" The board member's gaze shifted toward Marcus. She followed it. He was wiping dust from his hands again, movements unhurried. There was no triumph in his expression, just fatigue. "He'll be there," she said. Across the lobby, reporters surged against security lines. Microphones stretched forward like spears. A rumor had solidified into fact. The building had nearly failed. A maintenance worker had raised warnings. The CEO had tried to quiet him. Elliot approached Marcus, voice low. "They're requesting your name." He hesitated. "They already have it," Elliot added gently. Marcus nodded once. Victoria stepped up beside him, not in front of him. The subtle shift didn't go unnoticed. The lobby doors opened. Flashbulbs erupted instantly, flooding the space with white bursts of light. Questions overlapped in sharp waves. Was this negligence? Were safety warnings ignored? Is it true a staff member predicted the failure? Victoria raised her hand slightly, signaling for calm. "There was a structural risk that was identified earlier this week," she began, voice clear but stripped of polish. "That risk was not acted on with the urgency it required." A ripple moved through the press pool. She didn't deflect. She didn't soften it. "I made that decision," she continued. Marcus felt the weight of the admission settle over the room. A reporter leaned forward. "And the employee who raised concerns?" Victoria turned toward him. "This is the man who stabilized the beam and directed the evacuation." Cameras pivoted instantly. He stepped forward reluctantly, shoulders squared but expression steady. The flashes intensified. "Sir," a reporter called, "how did you know the structure would fail?" He answered without drama. "Because stress doesn't lie." Murmurs passed through the crowd. "Your maintenance staff?" Another asked skeptically. "Yes, and you predicted this?" "I assessed it." A pause. Victoria's voice cut in, not defensive, not commanding. "He is also a former Army Corps structural engineer." The air shifted. Questions changed tone. "How long ago did you serve? What specific warning did you file?" Marcus kept his answers brief. 3 days ago. Documented load variance and weld fatigue. Recommended immediate reinforcement. And you were ignored? Silence stretched. Victoria didn't step away from it. "Yes." Gasps rippled faintly through the lobby. The board members behind her shifted uncomfortably, but none interrupted. Marcus felt something unfamiliar, public recognition not for authority, but for restraint. A reporter near the back raised her voice. "Is it true you were offered money to retract your complaint?" The question sliced cleanly through the room. Victoria inhaled. "Yes," she said before he could respond. Cameras caught the moment. The admission. The unflinching delivery. Marcus didn't look at her. He looked at the reporters instead. "Why refuse?" Someone pressed. He answered simply. "Because there were children in that room." A beat of silence followed, heavier than the sirens earlier. "Your child?" the reporter asked. He nodded once. "And everyone else's," he added. That was the sentence that settled into the crowd. Victoria glanced at him briefly, and something inside her shifted again. Not humiliation this time, not defense. Recognition. Another board member stepped forward. Voice cautious. "An independent structural audit will begin immediately. All findings will be released publicly." The press scribbled furiously. Elliot stood off to the side, watching the inversion unfold in real time. The man once dismissed as overstepping labor now stood at the center of the narrative, not demanding attention, but earning it. Marcus stepped back slightly, allowing the engineers to answer technical follow-ups. He had no interest in spectacle. Victoria leaned closer to him quietly amid the noise. "You didn't have to stand beside me," he kept his gaze forward. "I didn't stand beside you," she understood. Another reporter called out, "Will he be promoted?" Victoria didn't hesitate. "He'll be consulted on every structural decision moving forward." Marcus turned slightly toward her, brow lifting. "I didn't agree to that." "You should," she replied softly. "We need someone who listens to steel before applause." The comment carried further than she intended. Several microphones caught it. A faint smile ghosted across his face. Not pride, not victory, something steadier. The cameras kept flashing. But for the first time that night, the tremors had stopped. The flashing cameras didn't. Reporters continued firing questions as emergency crews dismantled temporary barriers in the lobby. Victoria remained at the front, shoulders squared. But now, she stood half a step behind him instead of ahead. It was subtle. It mattered. "Will there be resignations?" Someone called out. "There will be accountability," she answered. Marcus felt the weight of those words settle into the marble beneath his boots. Accountability wasn't immediate. It was procedural, slow, sometimes selective. Elliot stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Board's convening upstairs. They want you present." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For the audit discussion." Victoria nodded. "You'll come." "That wasn't part of my job description. It should have been." Another reporter shouted, "Did you calculate the failure point alone?" Marcus answered calmly, "I documented stress variance and weld fatigue. Physics did the rest." A faint ripple of approval moved through the crowd. The narrative had shifted completely now. Not maintenance man versus executive. Competence versus arrogance. Victoria turned toward the press once more. "An independent firm will conduct a full structural review. All maintenance escalation protocols will be revised effective immediately." "Because of him?" A journalist pressed. "Because he was right," she said plainly. The statement landed harder than any defense could have. Security began ushering reporters back as the formal briefing concluded. The lobby slowly quieted, though camera lights still flickered like residual lightning. Marcus exhaled slowly. The adrenaline was wearing off now, leaving behind the dull ache in his forearms from tightening clamps against shifting steel. Victoria stepped closer once the press thinned. "You'll have a formal role in this audit." "I'm not interested in a title," he replied. "I didn't offer one." He studied her expression carefully. The arrogance that had defined her in the garage was gone. In its place, something less polished, more deliberate. "I offered you money," she said quietly. "You offered me truth." He didn't respond. Elliot checked his tablet. "Board's ready." They moved toward the executive elevators, the same ones Marcus had once been denied access to without clearance. No one stopped him now. As the doors closed, Victoria's reflection shimmered beside his in the mirrored interior. "You could have humiliated me out there," she said. "I wasn't trying to. But you could have." He shrugged lightly. The building did that. The elevator ascended smoothly, ironically stable compared to the trembling ballroom they'd left behind. When the doors opened to the executive floor, the contrast was sharp: plush carpeting, abstract art, quiet air scented faintly with expensive polish. Power lived here. Decisions that bent budgets and timelines happened behind these glass walls. Tonight, they would bend differently. Inside the boardroom, suited executives sat around a long walnut table, faces tight with concern. The skyline stretched behind them in glittering indifference. Victoria took her seat, but not at the head. She gestured for Marcus to sit beside the engineers instead. A murmur traveled around the table. One board member cleared his throat. "We need clarity on procedural failure." Marcus remained silent. Victoria answered first. "We deferred reinforcement upgrades to preserve event timelines and quarterly optics." "And the report?" Another asked. I dismissed it. The room absorbed that. An independent auditor dialed in via video call. Initial findings confirm cumulative fatigue. Immediate reinforcement is mandatory. Marcus leaned forward slightly. The weld seam wasn't designed for upgraded rigging load. The expansion plan exceeded tolerance. Heads turned toward him. "You reviewed the expansion specs?" someone asked. "Yes. Why weren't you consulted earlier?" Another pressed. Victoria spoke before he could, because I saw his uniform before I saw his credentials. Silence. The admission carried weight no PR statement could soften. Marcus felt no triumph in it, only inevitability. If you believe truth deserves a voice, even when it wears work boots, subscribe with the bell on. Stories like this aren't rare, they're just rarely told. The auditor's voice crackled through the speaker. "Full audit begins tomorrow morning. Public disclosure will follow." Victoria nodded. "It will." A board member leaned back, studying Marcus carefully. "Would you accept a formal structural oversight role?" He paused. His thoughts flickered briefly to Lila, her constellation blanket, her quiet pride in pointing at the tower. "I'll accept responsibility," he said evenly. "Not status." The distinction lingered. Victoria allowed herself the faintest nod. "Then we begin with responsibility." Outside the boardroom windows, the city lights shimmered steady and unshaken. Inside, something fundamental had shifted, not the structure of steel and concrete. The structure of power. The boardroom remained quiet for a long moment after his words settled. Outside the glass walls, the skyline glittered as if nothing had nearly fallen apart beneath it. Inside, the executives shifted in their seats, recalibrating their understanding of the man who had walked in wearing a maintenance uniform, and now spoke in the language of load tolerances and structural integrity. The independent auditor's voice echoed from the speaker. "Mr. Hale, based on preliminary scans, your clamp placement likely prevented progressive collapse." "Likely?" a board member asked sharply. "Highly likely," the auditor corrected. "Without redistribution, failure would have begun at the south beam and cascaded across the ballroom span." Victoria's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the table. She didn't look at Marcus, but she heard every syllable. Another executive leaned forward. "How did you calculate that so quickly?" Marcus answered plainly. "You don't calculate from scratch in moments like that. You recognize patterns." "From combat?" someone asked. He nodded once. "Bridges under convoy weight. Temporary bases under artillery vibration. Steel behaves the same under pressure." The room absorbed the implication. This wasn't luck. It was experience forged in places where collapse meant casualties. Elliot sat near the far end of the table, watching the inversion solidify. Hours ago, this same group would have dismissed a maintenance report without discussion. Now they were asking for his assessments before speaking themselves. Victoria finally turned toward him. "If we begin reinforcement tomorrow, what's the immediate priority?" He didn't hesitate. South weld replacement, load redistribution recalibration, then vibration dampening for the rigging. A board member scribbled notes quickly. "And occupancy limits?" Another asked. Reduced until independent certification confirms reinforcement. Victoria nodded. We follow that. The auditor added. Public transparency will mitigate liability. Marcus studied the polished table surface for a moment. Transparency isn't mitigation, it's prevention. A faint shift moved through the room again. Victoria didn't argue. Then we prevent. Phones vibrated intermittently across the table as social feeds updated in real time. Headlines had evolved from speculation to admiration. Maintenance worker saves hundreds at Langford Gala. Ignored safety report revealed. A board member exhaled slowly. The narrative's already written. Marcus met his gaze. Narratives don't hold beams. Silence followed, then, unexpectedly, a few restrained nods. Victoria leaned back slightly. Tomorrow morning we hold a second press briefing. Not defensive. Informative. And you'll stand beside him again? The same board member asked carefully. Yes, she said. The answer carried no hesitation now. The auditor concluded. Full audit results within 48 hours. The call ended, leaving only the hum of city air conditioning and the faint ticking of a wall clock. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Victoria addressed the room directly. I attempted to silence a safety concern because it threatened optics. That decision ends tonight. The directness startled even Marcus. We establish an independent safety oversight committee, she continued. He will sit on it. A board member cleared his throat. Formally? Formally. All eyes turned toward him. Marcus shifted slightly in his chair. I won't be a symbol. You won't be, Victoria replied. You'll be a safeguard. The word lingered. Outside the boardroom, staff members moved quietly, aware that something significant had occurred, but unsure how deeply it would ripple. In the lobby below, reporters still lingered, waiting for follow-up statements. Elliot finally spoke. Voice softer now. Your report. It was precise. Even the time-stamped vibration patterns matched tonight's escalation. Marcus gave a small nod. Patterns repeat when ignored. Victoria looked at him fully then. Why stay, she asked. After what I did in that garage, he held her gaze calmly. Because the building's still here, it was answer enough. A communications director entered quietly. Press is requesting confirmation that no employees will face retaliation for safety escalations. Victoria didn't look away from Marcus when she responded. Confirm it. The director nodded and exited. The shift wasn't theatrical. It wasn't loud. It was procedural and deliberate, like tightening a bolt until tension equalized. Marcus rose from his chair slowly. Engineers will need access to original expansion blueprints. You'll have it, Victoria said. He hesitated for a brief second, and the surveillance footage from the garage. A flicker crossed her expression. Not fear. Not defensiveness. Acceptance. It will be included, she answered. The boardroom lights reflected faintly against the glass walls, framing the city beyond. The tower still stood, but it stood differently now, under scrutiny, under reform. Marcus walked toward the door. Victoria rose as well. We begin at 6 a.m. I'll be here. He stepped into the hallway, the executive carpet soft beneath work boots that had once been told they didn't belong here. Behind him, inside that polished room, power recalibrated itself around something it had nearly crushed. And this time, the recalibration was deliberate. Marcus stepped into the quiet executive hallway, the door closing softly behind him. The hum of distant elevators replaced the charged silence of the boardroom. For a moment, he stood alone beneath recessed lighting that had once felt like a boundary line. Footsteps approached from behind. Wait, Victoria called. He turned slowly. The hallway was empty except for them now. No cameras, No board members. No reporters pressing for sound bites. Just polished floors and the faint reflection of city lights through distant glass. "You asked for the surveillance footage," she said, stopping a few feet away. "You intend to release it. I intend for it to exist in the audit. That's not the same thing." "No," he agreed. "It's not." She studied him carefully. "It shows me offering you money. It shows you trying to prevent a problem from going public." Her jaw tightened slightly. "It shows me trying to silence you." Yes. The word wasn't harsh. It was steady. She exhaled slowly. "Legal will advise against full release. Legal advises for liability. I advise for trust." Silence stretched between them, thinner than before but still present. "Trust doesn't repair stock value," she said. "It repairs structures." A faint sound escaped her, almost a humorless laugh. "You speak like everything's steel." "It is," he replied. Pressure reveals weakness. Her gaze shifted briefly toward the distant window at the end of the corridor. "I built this company from nothing, and nearly lost it over optics." She didn't deny it. A security officer approached carefully. "Ma'am, media is requesting follow-up confirmation about the bribe allegation." Victoria's posture straightened instinctively. The old reflex surfaced. Contain, redirect, control. Marcus watched the shift happen in real time. She glanced at him once, then back at the officer. "Confirm it," she said. "State that it occurred. State that it was wrong." The officer hesitated, surprised. "Yes, ma'am." He left quickly. Marcus studied her expression. "That'll cost you. It already has." A distant phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She ignored it. "You could walk away now," she said quietly. "No one would blame you." "I'm not here for blame." "Then what are you here for?" He considered that for a second. "So the next maintenance report doesn't get weighed against a quarterly forecast." Her eyes flickered with something unfamiliar. Respect without defensiveness. Down in the lobby, a renewed murmur rose as the confirmation reached reporters. Headlines would sharpen. Investors would react. Board members would strategize damage control. But the statement had been made. Victoria folded her arms loosely. Not protective, just thoughtful. "You said in the garage that you don't walk away from things that can crush children." "Yes. Does that include companies?" "If they're standing on unstable ground." Another quiet beat passed. She stepped closer, not invading, not towering. "Then help me reinforce it." He didn't answer immediately. "Not for image," she added. "For foundation." He searched her face for signs of performance. None appeared. The sharp edges were still there, but tempered now by something harder to fake. Consequence. "You'll lose people," he said. "I know. You'll lose contracts. I know. You may lose your position." Her shoulders lifted slightly. "If I deserve to." He held her gaze. For the first time since the garage, there was no imbalance between them. Just two people standing inside a building that had nearly fallen. "Full disclosure?" he asked. "Full disclosure. Independent oversight?" "Yes. No retaliation." "Guaranteed." He nodded once. The elevator at the end of the hallway chimed softly as it arrived. The doors opened to reveal Elliot, face flushed with urgency. "They're replaying footage on national feeds," he said. "Not the garage, just the stabilization. They're calling him the engineer in boots." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "That's unnecessary." "It's accurate," Elliot replied. Victoria glanced toward the elevator, then back at Marcus. "The story's already bigger than us." "It should be about systems," he said. "It will be." A faint vibration hummed through the building. Not a tremor this time, just the steady rhythm of reinforced generators maintaining stability. He listened to it instinctively. "It's steady," he murmured. "For now," she replied. He stepped toward the elevator. 6 a.m., she reminded him. I'll bring the original expansion schematics, he said. The doors began to close. Marcus, she said just before they sealed. He looked up. I was wrong. The admission hung in the air longer than any headline. He gave a small nod, not forgiving, not condemning, simply acknowledging. The elevator descended smoothly toward the lobby where reporters still waited and steel beams still held. And for the first time that night, the building felt balanced, not because it hadn't cracked, but because the cracks were finally visible. The elevator doors opened to a lobby that no longer buzzed with panic, but with aftermath. Reporters remained behind barricades, speaking into cameras under the glow of portable lights. Employees stood in quiet clusters, checking phones, replaying footage, absorbing what the night had revealed. Marcus stepped out first. The marble floor felt solid beneath his boots now, steady, reinforced by temporary supports above. He listened instinctively anyway. No tremor, just the low hum of generators and distant city traffic filtering through glass. Victoria followed a second later. Conversations shifted when people saw them together. A facilities worker near the reception desk straightened subtly. A security guard who had blocked Marcus earlier now gave him a small, almost embarrassed nod. The inversion wasn't loud, but it was everywhere. Elliot hurried toward them, tablet in hand. Audit firm confirmed public report release by tomorrow evening, he said. Full transparency, Victoria nodded. Good. A cluster of employees lingered near the lobby entrance, uncertain whether to disperse or wait. One of them, an older janitor with silver at his temples, stepped forward hesitantly. Sir, he said to Marcus, we've filed reports before. They don't always go anywhere. Marcus met his eyes. They will now. Victoria heard that. She didn't interrupt. Another employee spoke up. Is it true you warned them days ago? Yes, Marcus answered simply. And they tried to pay you off? A ripple of discomfort passed through the nearby executives. Victoria stepped forward before he could respond. Yes, I did. The admission settled heavier than before, not because it was new, but because it was repeated. The janitor studied her carefully. And now? Now, she said steadily, we changed the escalation process. Independent review, no internal suppression. Silence lingered for a second, testing the sincerity of the words. Marcus glanced toward the revolving doors where reporters still waited. They'll ask again, he said quietly. I'll answer again, she replied. A facilities supervisor approached with a clipboard. South quadrant sealed. Engineers recommend full closure for 72 hours. Approve it, Victoria said immediately. No debate, no delay. Marcus watched the reaction ripple through the staff, subtle but unmistakable. They were listening to how quickly she answered now. Outside, a reporter's voice carried faintly through the glass. Sources confirm internal warnings were raised. Victoria turned toward Marcus. We'll address them one more time before midnight. He nodded. They stepped together toward the entrance barricade where cameras flared back to life. The night air outside felt cooler, sharper against overheated nerves. A reporter called out immediately, will anyone be held accountable beyond public apology? Victoria didn't hesitate. Yes. Will that include you? Yes. The directness startled even seasoned journalists. And the employee who warned you? Another asked. Will he face retaliation? No, she said firmly. He will help redesign our oversight. Cameras pivoted toward Marcus. He spoke only when prompted. Structures fail when warnings are ignored. That won't happen again here. The phrase was simple. It carried. One final question cut through the noise. What changed your mind? Victoria paused, not for performance, but for truth. He refused to walk away, she said. Flashbulbs burst brighter. Marcus didn't look at her. He looked at the building rising behind them, lights glowing steady in upper floors that now stood empty. Inside the lobby, employees watched through glass, some with folded arms, some with cautious hope. The press conference wound down gradually. Questions thinned. Microphones lowered. As the reporters dispersed, a young intern approached hesitantly from the side entrance. "Sir," she said to Marcus, "I almost dismissed a vibration alert last month." "I won't again." He offered a small nod. "Good." Victoria overheard it. Back inside, the lobby lights dimmed slightly as cleanup crews resumed work. The atmosphere felt different now, not celebratory, not defeated. Reset. Victoria stopped near the reception desk and faced him fully. "The board will review my position," she said quietly. "That's between you and them," he replied. "And you? I'm here at 6. A faint, tired smile touched her expression. "Of course you are." He glanced once more toward the ballroom floor above, toward the reinforced clamps holding through the night. No tremors, just the steady hum of systems recalibrating. Victoria extended her hand, not as a superior, not as a savior, as a partner in consequence. After a brief pause, he shook it. The grip was firm, even, and somewhere within the structure of steel and policy and reputation, something foundational had shifted permanently. Not because collapse had been avoided, but because warning had finally been heard. The lobby thinned out slowly after midnight. Cleanup crews moved like quiet shadows across marble, resetting chairs, wiping dust from surfaces that had nearly become headlines for a different reason. The building stood steady now, reinforced, humbled. Marcus stepped outside into the cold night air. The barricades were gone. Media vans had rolled away, chasing fresher crises. Only a few security lights remained, casting pale halos onto the pavement. Victoria stood near the entrance, coat wrapped tightly against the wind. The city noise felt distant compared to the metallic groans that had filled the evening hours. "They'll vote tomorrow," she said without looking at him. "For or against?" he asked. "For accountability." He nodded once. "Good." She turned toward him. "You were right about one thing. Only one?" A faint, tired smile crossed her face. "Pressure reveals weakness." He didn't answer. For a moment, they stood in silence beneath the tower that had nearly betrayed its own weight. 6 a.m., she repeated quietly. "I'll be here," he said. This time, when he walked away, she didn't stop him. The next morning came sharp and clear. At 5:52 a.m., the city skyline glowed faintly pink as the sun edged upward. The executive entrance remained closed, but the service door clicked open as he swiped his badge. The hallway lights hummed awake above him. Steel doesn't forget stress overnight. He knew that. So, he moved first to the south quadrant, climbing the ladder once more to inspect the clamps installed under emergency pressure. They held. Engineers arrived minutes later. Blueprints rolled beneath their arms. Elliot followed, already speaking into a headset about audit schedules and press transparency. At exactly 6, Victoria entered the ballroom floor. No press, no entourage. Just her. She stopped beneath the exposed beam and looked up. "It's different in daylight," she said. "It always is," Marcus replied. In daylight, cracks looked less dramatic, but more honest. Engineers began measuring for permanent weld replacement. Reinforcement plates were laid out carefully along the floor. Calculations were rechecked. This time, no one rushed to meet optics. They moved to meet tolerances. Victoria stepped closer to the blueprint table. "Walk me through it," she said. He did. He explained load redistribution ratios, vibration dampening systems, reinforcement sequencing. She listened, not interrupting, not deflecting, just absorbing. Hours later, a formal statement went live across every platform. Full disclosure. Internal reform. Independent oversight. and attached to the release was the surveillance footage from the garage. No edits, no spin, just truth. The reaction was immediate and decisive. By evening, the board announced restructuring. Victoria would remain, but under oversight. Compensation reforms would prioritize safety compliance. Escalation channels would bypass executive bottlenecks entirely. Inside the building, something subtler happened. Maintenance staff walked straighter. Supervisors listened longer. Reports were read before budgets were calculated. Marcus stood near the south support as the first permanent weld plate was installed. Sparks burst bright against steel, the scent of heated metal filling the air. He felt it through his boots, the steady hum of reinforced structure, stronger than before. Victoria approached quietly. "The investors stayed," she said, "because you told the truth, because you didn't walk away." He glanced toward the weld seam, now thicker, reinforced. "Neither did you," he said. She considered that. "I almost did," she admitted, "but you didn't." A brief silence passed between them, not uncomfortable, just earned. Later that night, long after engineers had packed up and media cycles had shifted, Marcus returned home. Lila was waiting at the kitchen table, eyes wide. "Did the building fall?" she asked softly. "No," he said, kneeling beside her chair. It held. She studied him carefully. "Because of you?" "Because people listened." She smiled, small but proud. He tucked her under the constellation blanket as usual. The night outside their modest home was quiet. No sirens, no tremors, just stillness. The next day would bring audits, committees, structural redesigns. It would bring resistance and progress in equal measure. But tonight, the foundation was steady. Not perfect. Steady. If this story moved you, tell me, what's the next title we should tackle? Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Everyone thought the single dad was homeless. The emergency broadcast proved them wrong. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?